Today, you will be introduced to the benefits of combining vocabulary language with gesturing. A basic culture-related vocabulary language is introduced to infants and toddlers. Once children begin school, their vocabulary language is broadened. As students progress to high school and college, their vocabulary language becomes more challenging. Eventually, their vocabulary language will be fine-tuned to match their career. Here is a question. How do infants and toddlers learn their vocabulary language? One word, gesturing. If you click on this picture, it will take you to evidence which explain why gesturing is important to infants and toddlers.
Researchers at Alberta Children's Hospital are studying preterm babies to determine if gesture development can provide clues about the likelihood of developing language problems later on in childhood. The study, believed to be the first of its kind, is still in its early stages, but investigators hope the findings will one day help to create a simple diagnostic test that healthcare providers could use to flag and prevent potential language problems.
So there are specific gestures that we're looking for. There are things, one is called the proto-declarative, which is a referential point, and the child looks to their partner and back to the object. The parent then will provide the word because it's very clear what the child wants. The child learns that word because we know a child won't develop language if they're not attending to the object that they want a name for.
Researchers affix small reflectors to the child's forehead, cheeks, arms, and tummy that provide spatial references for creating the computer animation. While the baby sits on mom's lap, Dr. Liu uses toys in a standardized procedure to interact with the child and attempts to elicit communication at the child's developmental level.
We're hoping to find when we can first identify difficulties in gesture communication development so that we can intervene as early as possible. There's all kinds of evidence showing that the earlier you intervene, the better results you have. So that's why we're looking at shoulders and arms and head, because all of those come into force for a communicative gesture. And we have a very narrow window actually, because these communicative gestures start at about 9 months, and then a child starts talking around 12 months. By 18 months, the gestures and words and verbal are very complex. By the time they're 2, as you can see with Chloe, they're using multi-word utterances and aren't gesturing so much.
Well, we received a call from the hospital just asking if we wanted to partake in the study, and Clay and I both thought that, if there was anything that we could learn from this experience and how to better communicate with Chloe, that it would be more beneficial for her and also for other families in the future, people who also have preterm babies.
Particularly relevant today is our collaboration between the delay in communication development and how the children are moving. So we're actually bringing those two disciplines together, which is entirely unique to our knowledge that's never been done before.
This lab has given us an opportunity to objectively measure gestures. Before, we've relied on observational methods, which can be rigorous if you do them properly, but this is giving us an opportunity to really objectively look at the quality of the development of gestures, because we're able to look at timing within seconds and combinations, and also the direction of gaze, which is really important to communication in the early developmental years.
Gesturing is important to children. A question you should ask now is, how can gesturing help you in your career? Here is a research room. Hypotheses, theories, experiments, and data have been collected about gesture enrichment while learning a second language. You will be able to Click on icons which will lead you to different parts of the experiment. The stack of papers will direct you to the research evidence. By clicking on the question mark, you will see the question. The main question being asked is the use of gesture-enriched learning beneficial? We are back in the research room. We know the main question. Now, how did they come up with this question? If you click on the adult in the background, it will take you to the previous research. One study, adults learned second language vocabulary by reading L2 words aloud while viewing its written L1 translation and performed a gesture or looked at a picture. After 35 minutes of training, participants produced fewer translation errors for gesturing-enriched L2 words compared to picture-enriched words. In another study, gesture-enriched learning yielded more accurate L2 translation performance compared with picture-enriched learned in the 6 months following a 2-week-long training period. Click on the picture of the board so we can look at how they set up the experiment. There were 3 experiments completed. First experiment. Half concrete and half abstract words were chosen for the students to learn. If you click on the word words, it will take you to the list of concrete and abstract words. 54 third grade students were chosen at a primary school in Leipzig, Germany. The students were learning English as a second language. Half of the students were learning the German to English word through the use of gesture enrichment. The other half had no enrichment. These students participated in the learning process of 5 consecutive days in 4 5-minute sessions with 5-minute breaks in between. At the end of the 5 days, the students took 3 tests. First test, 3 days after. Second test, 2 months after. Third test, 6 months after. Second experiment. The words were the same. 43 different third grade students participated from the same school. Just like the first experiment, half of the students had gesture enrichment, while the other half had no enrichment. Also, the second experiment had 5 consecutive days with 4 sessions and 5-minute breaks in between. The testing was the same as well. 3 days after, 2 months after, and 6 months after. Third experiment. The words were the same as the first 2 experiments. 51 different third grade students from the same German school participated in the experiment. The third experiment was slightly different. Half of the students had gesture enrichment, while the other half had picture enrichment. The learning sessions and the testing days were the same as the first 2 experiments. By clicking on the tablet, you will see how the students learn through gesturing, pictures, or no enrichment. In each trial, auditorily presented English words were accompanied either by a video of an actress performing a gesture, a picture, or no complementary stimulus. Each words were followed by the foreign word or both foreign and native words together with their teacher. If you click on the data chart, you will be able to see the results of the experiment. Experiment 1 results. Higher overall test scores were observed for foreign language nouns that had been learned with gesture enrichment compared to no enrichment for all 3 test types. Higher scores were observed for abstract nouns that had been learned with gesture enrichment compared with no enrichment for both translation tests. Experiment 2 results. Higher overall test scores were observed for foreign language nouns that had been learned with gesture enrichment compared to no enrichment for all 3 test types. Experiment 3. No significant differences in test scores were observed for foreign language nouns that had been learned with picture enrichment compared with gesture enrichment. Let's go back to the research room. If you click the exit picture, you will get to the conclusion of the experiment. Conclusion. Self-performed gesture enrichment and pictures enrichment may serve as equally beneficial strategies for learning a foreign language vocabulary. By clicking the arrow, you'll go back to the research room. How can the results of this study affect your career? By clicking on this child, you will learn how the results of this study can affect your career. Vocabulary. Every trait has its own career language. For example, doctors have their own language when choosing a career as a doctor. The vocabulary language is a necessity.
His past medical history does include history of stuttering priapism and lower extremity ulcers. He also has last pain crisis about a year ago. And then his right knee had mild swelling and a small effusion, but no erythema. It was non-tender to palpation, but upon full extension there was some tenderness.
This is the same for every career. Mechanics, paleontology, artist, engineer, you name it. Every career has their own vocabulary language. Embedding gesture-enriched learning into the lessons will help students thrive in their field.